2025, yet another brutal zombie drama crashes onto the scene. Bloodthirsty creatures no one has ever seen before roam the earth unchecked. In an age with no firearms, how can the weak even hope to survive? Legend has it that back in the year 1600, the Tokugawa clan of Japan, desperate to defeat an overwhelmingly powerful enemy, resorted to a secret weapon in battle. No one really knows where this weapon came from, because those who saw it rarely lived to tell the tale. Fast forward 35 years, and life under Tokugawa rule has become more prosperous than ever. On this particular day, the villagers of Okada are in the middle of their annual festival. The whole village is alive with celebration. Meanwhile, a burly man sneaks off into the nearby fields to relieve himself. But when he stands up, something feels off. From the direction of the festival grounds, he hears distant screams. Curious and confused, he heads toward the sound, only to find the plaza eerily deserted. Scattered goods and overturned stalls are all that remain. He circles the area, searching for any sign of life, and finally spots a neighbor hiding behind a pile of stones. The neighbor, trembling, urges him to get out of there immediately, but it's already too late. In the next moment, a huge, bloated figure suddenly appears and slams the man through the air with terrifying strength. The terrified neighbor tries to make a run for it, but is quickly taken down by two grotesque figures. The burly man scrambles along the corridor trying to escape, but the monstrous brood is fast and soon catches up to him. Not long after, the neighbor who had been slammed to the ground suddenly stood up again. But this time, something was very wrong. He was no longer human. Meanwhile, in the nearby village of Tagajuku, a young woman named Orin jolted awake from a nightmare. Outside, the village was in a commotion. She quickly greeted her master before rushing out to see what was happening. It turned out that someone had accidentally injured a fellow villager during a hunting trip. When the crowd saw Orin arrive, it was as if hope had just walked through the door. She was the most skilled healer in the village. The wounded man was carried to the clinic, and before her bald-headed master could even lift a hand, Orin had already taken over. Her movements were fast, steady, and precise. She treated the injury with practiced ease. But just as things were calming down, she overheard someone mention that her adopted daughter had snuck out of the house. In an instant, her composure vanished. She left the patient behind and rushed to the training hall. There, she finally found her daughter, Toki. Without hesitation, Orin stepped in, disarmed her with a swift hand switch, and scolded the sword instructor for allowing her to join. Toki had been sickly since birth. Martial arts were the last thing she should be doing. But Toki was as stubborn as they come. She declared that one day, she'd be strong enough to defeat Orin. Without waiting for a reply, she dashed out of the dojo, but only made it a few steps before collapsing into a violent coughing fit. Orin scooped her up and brought her back to the clinic. After brewing a special medicinal tonic, Toki's symptoms finally began to ease. But despite the momentary peace, a deep worry lingered on Orin's face. By now, the physician from Okada village should have already delivered Toki's medicine, but it had been days, and there was still no sign of him. The bald master mentioned he'd heard rumors that Okada was battling an outbreak, which might explain the delay. But Toki's supply of medicine was running dangerously low. Orin didn't hesitate. She made the decision to go to Okada village herself. Before leaving, she gave strict instructions to the house steward, urging him to keep a close eye on the mischievous Toki. Although Toki wasn't her biological daughter, it was clear from Orin's eyes. She cherished the girl even more than blood. Worried for her safety, the bald master decided to accompany Orin on the journey. Along the way, the two stopped to rest at a roadside inn. That night, Orin sat quietly by the candlelight, holding a simple hairpin in her hands. Her heart softened into a smile. It was a gift from Toki, bought with her own saved pocket money. The girl could be wild, but she wasn't without warmth. The master, watching her from across the room, recalled that stormy night years ago. Orin had arrived soaked in rain, her clothes stained with blood, carrying a frail and unconscious Toki in her arms. Since then, the two had settled in the village clinic, slowly becoming family. Orin had proven herself a gifted healer and a trusted assistant. And yet, through all these years, she had never once spoken of her past. At dawn the next morning, under the blazing sun, Orin and her master continued their journey. As they neared Okada village, they noticed a villager in the distance, staggering strangely. The man looked terrified, like he'd just seen a ghost. The moment he realized someone was approaching, he cried out in panic and limped away as fast as he could. The two exchanged puzzled glances. Something was clearly wrong. When they finally reached the outskirts of Ishigo village, what they saw left them speechless. The entire area looked like it had been ransacked. Tools and goods lay scattered across the ground, but not a single soul was in sight. The bald master inspected the scene carefully, checking each corner for signs of life. It wasn't until he reached a shaded pavilion that he spotted something, a body, or at least what remained of one. His expression turned grave. Something terrible had happened here. He turned to Orin immediately, urging her to leave. This place was dangerous. But Orin refused. She couldn't abandon her master, and besides, she still needed to find medicine for Toki. There was no choice but to press on. Together, they made their way toward the clinic nestled in the hills above. But neither of them noticed the figure down by the nearby creek, an unkempt man, crouched over the water, quietly washing up. When he finished, he pulled out a small knife and held it in his hand, staring at it with a distant, haunted look in his eyes. As night fell, Orin and her master finally reached the mountain clinic. Just as they crossed the old wooden bridge, they spotted a figure huddled in the shadows near the corner of the building. Orin started to approach, but the figure suddenly turned around, revealing a twisted, monstrous face. The bald master rushed forward, managing to shove the creature aside. But before they could catch their breath, another one stepped out of the darkness. These weren't ordinary people anymore. They had lost all traces of humanity, now driven purely by a primal hunger. Orin fought desperately, managing to take one down with everything she had. Then she ran to help her master fend off the second attacker. Just as they were getting their bearings, more figures began stumbling toward them from the woods. Orin screamed for help, pounding on the wooden door of the clinic with everything she had. Finally, the lock gave way, and the two of them slipped inside just in time. She shoved a heavy wooden table against the entrance, bracing it as the creatures outside slammed and clawed at the door, their howls echoing through the forest. But just as Orin began to catch her breath, a figure leapt from the shadows inside the clinic, striking her hard and knocking her unconscious. In the haze of her dreams, the image of the relentless assassin who had been hunting Toki haunted her once again. When Orin finally came to, she found herself and her master tied tightly to wooden pillars. It turned out there was already a survivor hiding inside the clinic, a man who muttered constantly, his eyes wild with fear. He kept repeating the same thing over and over. The villagers, they've turned into flesh-eating monsters. I've been hiding here, barely surviving. He confessed that he was terrified that once the supplies ran out, he too might become one of those things. Orin didn't waste time arguing. Instead, she quietly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone, using it to grind against the ropes binding her wrists. But the survivor grew increasingly unstable. His ramblings shifted into something darker. He now claimed he had no choice but to turn the bald master into dried meat for survival. As he raised a giant axe, Orin sprang into action, leaping forward to block the blow. She had no weapon, no real way to defend herself. As she dodged and scrambled, their fight accidentally damaged the already fragile wooden door. Cornered and out of options, Orin could only brace herself, until suddenly, several decaying hands burst through the broken door and grabbed the deranged survivor. She and her master could only watch in horror as the man was eaten alive before their eyes. But just when they thought it was over, the man stirred. His body twitched, then rose. The bald master let out a furious roar. It's just like the legend said, he's a zombie. The only way to kill him is to destroy the head. Orin gripped the dagger in her hand as memories came flooding back, moments she had tried so hard to forget. Outside, the undead had finally broken through the wooden door. Her master was tackled to the floor in an instant, struggling beneath a pile of snarling corpses. In his final effort, he shouted through clenched teeth, "Whatever you've been through before, none of it matters now. You have to kill if you want to live." A fire ignited in Orin's eyes. With newfound resolve, she reached behind her head and pulled out her hairpin. In one swift motion, she drove it straight into a zombie's skull. Without hesitation, she snatched the fallen dagger off the floor and moved like water, precise, efficient, deadly. Within moments, every zombie inside was either twitching on the ground or truly dead. Her master, bloodied but conscious, offered her a pained but sincere smile. "You kill to survive. That's not a crime. And besides, these things aren't people anymore." But there was no time to rest. Just then, a massive zombie burst through the shattered doorway. Orin and her master made a run for it, sprinting out the back and circling around the clinic. But the hulking creature wasn't far behind. As they reached the narrow wooden bridge, their pace slowed, just enough for the monster to catch up. It lunged. Orin tried to resist with everything she had, but the beast was too strong, pinning her beneath its bloated frame. In that moment of desperation, an image of Toki flashed in her mind. Her little girl, not yet grown, still needing her. That thought alone was enough to reignite the strength in her limbs. She roared and thrashed, just as, alive, powerful figures suddenly leapt out from the trees. In a blur, he kicked the massive zombie off her, then brought his blade down hard, severing its head with a clean, decisive strike. Meanwhile, the long-haired man who had been washing up in the mountains had finally made his way into the bustling downtown district of the county. His steps were firm as he walked straight into a pleasure house. One of the serving girls began to complain. Ever since yesterday, business had been unusually slow. Rumors were spreading that the dead had started walking around outside. But the man didn't respond. Instead, he suddenly asked, "How much would it cost to buy your freedom?" The courtesan paused, gave a deep bow, and then burst out laughing. She'd never had a customer try to buy her freedom on the very first meeting. Besides, she was perfectly content with her life here and had no interest in leaving with anyone. A flicker of disappointment crossed the man's face. After they were finished, the courtesan wrinkled her nose slightly and remarked that he had a strange scent on him. She casually asked for his name. He said his name was Shiro. Hearing this, the woman froze for a moment, then said their village once had a Shiro too, a doctor's son. But he had a face so disfigured that he never went out without covering it with a cloth bag. The entire village avoided him like a ghost, all except her. She never minded how he looked. Shiro was puzzled. "Why did you do that?" The courtesan smiled faintly. "Because it made me look like a kind person. The men in the village saw me as gentle and virtuous." But then, she added, there were rumors. Someone claimed to have seen Shiro eating a person. After that, he vanished completely. Shiro listened in silence, then calmly said, "That's because my own family locked me away. I only came out after I'd eaten everyone in the village." The courtesan's smile froze. The realization hit her like lightning. This man in front of her was the monster from her village. To Shiro, she had been the only person who ever treated him with kindness, the one soft light in his dark, tormented life. When he learned she'd ended up working here, his first instinct was to rescue her, to buy her freedom. But now, he finally understood. Her so-called kindness had never been genuine. It was all just a performance to polish her image. The one sliver of warmth in Shiro's world shattered. His gaze darkened, his pupils blood red. Without hesitation, he lunged forward and tore out her throat. Moments later, Shiro stepped outside into the night. Behind him, the freshly turned undead courtesan followed in his wake. Meanwhile, chaos engulfed the streets of the county town. Everywhere, scenes of zombies attacking terrified civilians played out in horrifying repetition. The steward of the Tokugawa family hurriedly reported to his lord. Their very survival was now at stake. Not far away in Togo village, young Toki had just stepped outside when a lone zombie suddenly appeared, shambling toward her. It was clear, the terrifying zombie virus had erupted across the land.